that trip really changed a lot of things for me. But I got that one picture of the guy. He was just like leaning in the doorway, open doorway of his house on stilts. And when you looked inside the floor, you could see like through the floor down to the water. His wife was feeding a little baby and the kid was there. And he just had the proudest, most content smile on his face. And to me, here was a man that by Western standards had nothing, but basically he had everything. He had a home, a roof, food, a family, and that was what made him happy. So after I saw that, I was living in Hawaii at the time, and it's like I went back to Hawaii and I sold everything I didn't need. It was like, I don't need all this stuff. And that was what gave me enough money to go back later that year for 3 months, was getting rid of all that extra stuff I didn't need anymore.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Paul Schmid, the host of The Pursuit Zone, a podcast that interviews explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 185 with Scott Sharick. Scott is currently on a long-distance cycle tour, and in this episode we talk about some of his adventures through Cambodia, Vietnam, India, and Bangladesh. Before we start, I want to read this piece of listener mail that I got. Hi, Paul. My name is Victor. I'm originally from Spain, and I want to express my gratitude to all the work you put in to make this podcast. In my humble opinion, this is by far the best adventure podcast out there. Additionally, you are a great host, allowing all your guests to talk about their adventures and or anything they find relevant. I've listened to all your shows in the last 7 to 8 months, and honestly, I can't wait for the next one. Again, thank you, and keep up the amazing work. Gracias. De nada, Victor. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who sent in an email note to me over the past several years. So let's get into the show, and let me introduce Scott. He lived in Western New York and Hawaii before moving to Cambodia in 2015, where he explored the country by motorbike. During his time in Cambodia, he suffered a stroke, and luckily fully recovered from it. But the experience made him think he needed to go on a long adventure. His first big cycle tour was in 1990 across the United States. Now, he's on an even longer cycle trip he calls Strokes to Spokes. Starting in Cambodia, his travels have taken him through Southeast Asia, India, Nepal, and currently Australia. And as a photographer, his camera keeps pulling him in directions he wouldn't otherwise have gone. You can learn more at his website, adventuresofaregularguy.com. Scott Sharick, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Hi, Paul. Nice to talk to you.
Scott, what did you do for a career?
Let's see. For 30 years, I was a respiratory therapist, and I worked in Rochester, New York, and Hawaii, and then did some travel assignments. And most of my career doing that was doing pediatric and neonatal transports.
What is the role of a respiratory therapist?
Basically, we take care of people's breathing, and that can be anything from people who have asthma and have to take medicine, the breathing treatments, all the way up to people that can't breathe on their own and have to breathe on a machine. And we take care of the machine, testing the blood, making the adjustments. So anything from a newborn premature infant that's very small and can't breathe on their own, to pediatrics that end up with infections, to adults that get in car accidents, or people that are post-surgery.
Did you find that a rewarding job?
Yeah, I kind of fell into it by accident, and I was there for 30 years, so obviously I didn't hate it. And I always told people that I really did like my job. But then I was thinking the past few weeks, it's like, I really did like my job, but now I don't work. And it's like, I think no job is still better than a job that you like. And I think most of it was, I just didn't like going to work. I didn't mind doing the work, and I found it very rewarding because I met so many people that kind of inspired me in many ways. But the fact that you have to get up, you have to go to work. I don't like people telling me, I want you here Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'd rather be a little bit more free. So I always loved my job. I just didn't like going to my job.
Why did you move to Cambodia?
Back in 2014, I was working in Hawaii at the time, and I did a photo tour through Vietnam that had a 4-day add-on to Cambodia. I never had it in my mind to go to Cambodia, even though it's very famous for Angkor Wat and a lot of people go there. As soon as I got off the airplane, it was usually you fly halfway around the world. And for me, I'm tired. You get off the plane, everything kind of bothers you in a way. And I know, just go to bed, wake up in the morning, everything's going to be fine. But when I landed in Cambodia, it was I just felt like I was home. And during those 4 days, I was never a people photographer. On that trip, instead of doing landscapes, it was more people oriented. And I really fell in love with the people of Cambodia. And after that was in February of 2014, I went back for 3 months in the summer. And then a year later, I went back and stayed for almost 3 years. I just happened to go there and fall in love with it.
And so you basically retired from your job and said, I want to be an expat and stay in Cambodia.
Yeah. One of the things that I learned from a lot of my patients, or watching people for 30 years and pretty serious medical conditions, was you never know from day to day, how long we're going to live. And for the most part, we try to live as long as we can, but anything can happen. I mean, so many things can happen to people, from sickness to injury. And so many people in Western countries work very hard throughout their whole life, working towards retirement. But for me, it was so many people, when they get to retirement age, they're either too sick or too tired to really do a lot, or just basically too old. And it was well, I had a choice of stopping my job and moving and enjoying life a little bit more and having a lot less money, but still being able to survive. And for me, I just thought it was more important to kind of enjoy life while I was still relatively younger, and not necessarily retiring in my 60s.
What do you consider to be too old?
Too old is when you can't do what you want to do, whatever that is. I know a lot of people that enjoy their retirement. They enjoy doing not much, and that's what they like to do. But for me, I consider myself a pretty active person. So there's very few times in a year that I don't go outside. And that could be for, a few reasons, maybe 3-4 days a year that I don't see the outside. I just need to get outside. If the ability to not go and do what I wanted to do, to travel, to explore, to ride my bike, if I wasn't able to do that because of physical limitations of aging, then to me, that would be too old.
What's your favorite city in Cambodia?
Probably to live in, I would have to say Siem Reap, because even though I kind of like smaller cities, I still need things to do. And there's kind of enough to do. But a couple of cities that I like, and Siem Reap is where Angkor Wat is. So basically Angkor Wat was, if I was going to ride my bicycle or my motorcycle, it was 10 minutes away from me. So it was very close. But as far as other cities visiting, I like Battambang a lot, but it just didn't have enough to keep me occupied if I was going to live there. And Kampot down at the ocean down on the south side is smaller, but it's kind of older and has a lot of French influence and in the buildings and the old architecture and everything. But a lot of expats and backpackers go to Kampot. So those two cities I kind of liked as far as visiting.
What did you learn when you took your motorbike around all 24 provinces?
That took me, I think, about a month. And the reason I took a month is because that was between rent checks. I had to pay my rent, then I had to be back a month later to pay my rent again, even though I didn't stay in my apartment for a month. I can remember it was almost around Christmas time, and I was up in the mountains, in the Cardamom Mountains, in a small little village called Osam. And they started making a tourism push. And there was one man there, his name is Mr. Lim. And he wanted people to go from illegal logging to doing things that are more constructive for the community. So there's a lot of things that he was doing to get people to kind of travel there, but they really had very, very little there. And I would get up early in the morning. Well, I should say the chickens woke me up like at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would go out walking, looking for photographs. I remember walking down the road, and there was a family, and Christmas time, it was up in the mountains, so it was kind of cool, and I had to wear a jacket. Actually, it was cold. They had a little fire going, and it was just like a mom, a dad, two little kids, and a baby. They were just huddled around the fire, and I was walking down the street, and they just motioned me over to come and join them at the fire. And they didn't speak English, and I spoke very little Khmer. So I just sat there being warmed by the fire, and I thought, and it was Christmas time, and the mother holding the baby like in front of the fire was almost like Mary holding the baby Jesus. And it just seemed kind of like profound in a way. And I'm not a religious person, but I grew up Catholic. The fact that people would just see a stranger walking down the street and invite them to get warm at the little fire that they had, things like that were things that kind of stuck with me the most.
So 1990, you take a ride across the U.S., and how did that change your life?
Before 1990, I never traveled west of the Mississippi River. And going by bike, on that trip, I had a friend from work. She followed me in my car, so I didn't have to carry all my gear, and I was just able to move. And we would just meet up every 20, 30, 40 miles or whatever. I'm actually a very shy person, and I'm less shy now than I was then. But it kind of opened up the fact that travel was something that I really wanted to do. It took me places, and it allowed me to see things that I only saw in pictures or on TV or in movies before, and just the freedom of traveling and everything. It was from that day forward, when I finished the trip, that I knew I just wanted to travel and travel as much as I could.
What kind of bike were you on back then?
Back then, it was a Trek, and I forgot the model. It was red, and I believe it was more of, I'm going to say hybrid, but hybrid now means more like mountain bike and street bike hybrid. But back then, hybrid meant more of a touring bike, street bike hybrid, because I didn't need a full touring bike because I wasn't going to carry all my gear. Looking back, I was pretty naive, and that trip was 3,309.4 miles. That trip, I remember precisely how many miles it was. And never once did I like clean my chain or oil my chain, and didn't do any maintenance on my bike. And the fact that I didn't have gear probably allowed me to survive like that. But yeah, the bike made it.
I'm surprised the bike was geared adequately for you to go up mountains on that thing.
Back then, to do my route, which I did by hand, I had to take maps and add up all the little in between the tick marks. And now you just go online and instantaneously you get routes. So going through some of the mountains I went through, like in northern Laos and Thailand and the Himalayas, I wondered how much I climbed on that trip and what the gradients were. And come to find out, like the maximum gradient was like 14%, which may sound like a lot, but when I was hit with like grades of 22% in northern Thailand on a fully loaded bike, the 14% was actually quite a relief.
Now, I was reading through your blog, and I was really surprised when I read this, but at one point in time, you, and this is fairly recently, I think when you were living in Cambodia, you had your foot run over by an SUV. What the heck? I would think your cycling career would be over at that point.
Actually, yeah, that was in Cambodia, and still to this day, when I go by the location, I cringe because I think about it. But I was kind of on the side of the road, and, you know, standards of driving and everything in Cambodia and Southeast Asia are a little different than the U.S. There was a guy in an SUV that was trying to get into a parking spot, and I was on my motorcycle, and I only had flip-flops on. He was trying to get into the parking spot, and my foot, he didn't just run over the foot. He was turning his wheel at the same time. So it was kind of like he was putting out a cigarette, like underneath your foot. And that's how my foot was just kind of squished. And literally when he got off of it and I looked down, I laughed because it reminded me of the cartoons when somebody, you know, would hit somebody with a hammer and they'd have a flat foot. that's what my foot looked like. It's like, holy crap. That part of it bounced back pretty quickly. That was probably like the only time I was actually stuck in my apartment for 2 weeks and waiting for that to heal, and before I could even go outside and start walking and everything. But that changed my trip, because during that 2 weeks, originally I was going, after I bought a bike in Cambodia, I said, well, now I have time. Why don't I go down to Bali? I was going to ride my bicycle from Siem Reap to Bali and back. During those 2 weeks in my apartment, all I could do was watch TV, watch YouTube, and eat. I started looking up all the videos on people riding their bikes in different parts of the world, and my trip just expanded and expanded. And it's like, oh, China. I never thought about China. Oh, Australia. Yeah, I could do that. And Africa. It's like all these things. So my trip just expanded from that point. So it's kind of like one of those, most people don't think that somebody running over your foot is a serendipitous moment. But for me, drastically changed the aspects of this bicycle ride.
So were any bones broken? Did you have to get a cast?
Well, officially, I don't know, because I didn't go to the doctor. So I wonder, and I was actually going to, you can get pretty cheap x-rays in Cambodia. I couldn't walk and everything, and I was getting a little bit nervous. It would swell up, and, you know, it was kind of bloody, and there's a lot of things going on in the beginning, but sometimes I'm just a little bit hard-headed. So I didn't go have it checked out, other than losing the toenail. And I noticed a little bit of a difference, like during some extreme, like climbing, not on the bike so much, but like if I was hiking or going upstairs to a temple or something. So, you know, as far as I know, it's okay.
Well, you still got it, so everything turned out good.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, you ended up having a stroke, and that was quite the story of how you had to drag yourself out of bed and how you eventually ended up in Thailand. Can you give us kind of the short kind of recap that version for us?
Yeah, I was in my apartment, and I woke up about 1:30 in the morning, and I thought I slept on my arm funny, but I quickly realized that the whole right side of my body was paralyzed. And of course, I knew at that point I had a stroke. So I tried to call the ambulance 3 times, but this is Cambodia, so they don't even answer the phone. So it's like, okay. I didn't have phone numbers for a lot of people, but some people like were online, and I tried to message a friend that actually, they lived in the apartments upstairs, and they didn't answer, so they probably went to bed. And it's like, well, I've got to get out on my own. So the first thing, I couldn't figure out like how I was going to get out of bed, because I thought, well, if I go down paralyzed side first, I might fall on my arm or my leg and break my arm, but not even know it. But if I go down the other way, then there's nothing that I can't hold on with my paralyzed side. And I can't remember which way I got off the bed, but I got off the bed and I had to slide my body through my apartment. I grabbed my phone. I had to put clothes on. I tried to put a belt on, but I couldn't do a belt like one-handed. So I just took that off. I happened to sell a motorcycle just like a few days before, and I still had like $700 cash up on top of my counter, which I had to reach and get, because I knew in Cambodia they want cash when you go to the hospital, even if you have insurance. But I heard the housekeeper was outside talking to somebody through the fence, and she doesn't speak English. But I made it to the door, opened the door, and I'm hanging halfway out the door, and I call her, and she looks at me thinking that I'm drunk, laying in my doorway. And I lifted up my arm, and it just fell, and she started crying. And because there's a lot of people that have strokes in Cambodia, apparently. I see a lot walking around. She knocked on the door, got help, and the ambulance eventually came. Went to the hospital there, but they don't have an MRI. They don't have the medicine needed for strokes. And I was starting to be able to move and everything, but then it would go away. It would come back. It would go away. Eventually, they sent me to Thailand, Bangkok. So I spent 4 or 5 days in the ICU, and then they wanted to keep me in Thailand for 10 more days for the next visit before I went back to Cambodia, so I stayed there. But interestingly, the hospital that I got flown to, and Bangkok has quite a few hospitals, This was in 2016, but in 2006, I flew to that exact same hospital to pick up a stroke patient, part of medical transport. They were from Canada, but he had his stroke in Laos, so they got flown to Bangkok. And basically, he was flying home to die. His wife didn't want him to die in Asia, so they wanted to go home and see family and everything. So I was in that hospital in the exact same ICU 10 years previous, picking up a stroke patient, and then I show up being a stroke patient 10 years later.
And what do? Do they just treat you with blood thinners, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I was on all sorts of medicine, and in the beginning, you're on quite a bit of medicine. And everybody there, I really, as soon as we came in the door to the emergency room after the transport, and I felt like I was home, like I was in a real hospital. So I felt very comfortable, and everybody was, extremely professional and knowledgeable. And they had I was immediately within an hour taken to the MRI in the middle of the night. I remember when I actually left to go back to Cambodia, I had to buy a suitcase to put in all the medicine that I got.
You start off on a long-haul trucker. Is that the bike that you got in Cambodia, or did you end up getting that in Thailand?
Cambodia actually had not a whole lot of options for touring bikes. And another benefit of having my foot run over is I found a guy in Thailand that's American from Ohio, but he teaches bicycle mechanics in Thailand. So I was actually able to go there, and I kind of trained with him for 2 days because I figured I should know a little bit more about my bike and do some hands-on and everything. And he was able to kind of list all the things you want to get on a touring bike and some places to buy them in Thailand. So I actually picked up the long-haul trucker, ordered it on that trip from Bangkok.
What do you have for your luggage setup?
Well, too much. I guess everybody's going to say that all the time, but I really do have too much. But I always tell people at the airport and people on my trip, I go, everything you see, that bicycle and my bags, that is everything I own. As I moved from New York to Hawaii to Cambodia, I slowly got rid of stuff. And basically everything is gone except what I carry on my bike. So I have Ortlieb panniers, 2 in the back, 2 in the front, a duffel bag that goes on the top of the back panniers, a handlebar bag, and 2 smaller like dry bags that go on top of the front rack. And up until now, in fact, up until like an hour ago, I also had a frame bag. But because I'm going to be going through parts of Australia that I'm not going to have a whole lot of water, I took the frame bag out and put a water cage on there. So, yeah, pretty heavy.
You had some issues with the bike. Ultimately, you ended up getting rid of that long-haul trucker frame, and now you're on a Surly Troll. How's the Troll working out so far?
Actually, I like the Troll better than the long-haul trucker. I think part of it is it's more of a mountain bike configuration. So there's a lot of rough roads that I had to go through, mostly like in India, probably had the roughest roads, and then Myanmar also. I kind of like the configuration and the way that I sit on the bike a little bit better than I did on a more traditional touring bike frame. So for me, it's worked out fine. And I also, before I had butterfly handlebars, when I got the new frame and I switched to Jones bars, which I really like because they're nice and wide. And I kind of like that wide stance on the bike.
What do you have for grips?
Just regular. For a long time, I had problems with like numbness in my hands, not on this trip. I tried everything, bicycle gloves, and I really hated bicycle gloves because they get dirty and smelly. And, if you're going to ride every day, it's kind of more difficult to kind of like keep them clean and everything. But I found out that it was more the way that, you position yourself on the bike, that you should have a bike that fits well. And I haven't had a bike fitting, which I wouldn't mind doing at some point. I was kind of slouching a little bit, let's say, where, my head was going down from my shoulders when I would ride. I found out that a lot of times numbness in your hands comes from kind of pinching a nerve up in your neck. So you should kind of have your shoulders down most of the time. The way that my brake levers kind of cocked my wrists a little bit. So I just changed those two things. And, on this trip, I've never used bicycle gloves and my hands don't go numb.
What's your preferred travel style? Do you like to travel quickly or do you like to travel slowly?
I wish I could go faster when I'm biking, but I actually like to travel slowly. My route through Southeast Asia, I've been on the road about a year and a half, and I did take 5 weeks off. I went to the U.S. for a vacation for my trip. Sometimes you have to get from point A to point B quickly for whatever reason. I average about 55 miles a day when I ride. I wouldn't want to average like 20 miles a day. It just feels, like I wasn't going anywhere. I wish I took more time to kind of take things in a little bit. So my preference would be to go slow and smell the roses, as they say, and just kind of experience the different people. Like right now I'm in Sydney. So Sydney is just a big city. Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, all big cities. I prefer the small country where you go down and you meet people that basically never see a Westerner, much less a Westerner on a bicycle. And, they're very interested in what you're doing.
What do you kind of plan for a budget month to month?
I never really thought about a budget much. I just keep hoping I have enough money to survive. This trip hopefully will take me around the world in about 5 years' time. And I say I'll continue as long as I'm physically able to, mentally able to, and financially able to. And I say that because most people that don't bike think that biking, the hardest part is your muscles. Actually, the hardest part is mentally to be able to every day keep moving and going and living on the road. And you go through a lot of things that, things change almost constantly. You never know what's going on. So you're always planning. So mentally is also very difficult. And then being alone on the road can be very difficult too. And I asked a friend of mine, he rides 6 months a year in Asia, and the other 6 months he lives in Germany and teaches mountain biking. And I asked him a few years ago, I said, do you ever get lonely on the road? And he just laughed and he said, with 7 billion people in the world, it's hard to get lonely. I think that's very true, but it also takes a certain kind of mentality to be on your own and be alone. And some people, when they're alone, then they get lonely. And some people, when they're alone, they don't. Right.
That's kind of the introvert extrovert thing, isn't it?
Exactly.
What's your plan if you run out of money? Are you going to just come back to the U.S. and start working?
When I get done crying, let's see. I don't think that's just something that's not in my mind. I don't think like that. So I haven't really thought about it. A lot of people do ask me, well, what are you going to do when you finish? And it's like, I have no idea. And I don't need to know at this point. Assuming that I finish like in 4 more years, which will be about a 5-year trip, I will be at retirement age. So I can actually get some retirement money coming in if I want to. And with that, like if I was living in Cambodia, I could live very comfortably on the amount of money that I would get. But if I were to have to go back to the U.S. now because I ran out of money, then I would have to get a job and work. So I think there's a lot that keeps me from even thinking about that.
Let's talk about some of the places that you've been on the cycle tour so far. Let's talk about Vietnam. What do you want to talk about in Vietnam? What are the highlights for you?
Well, Vietnam, I started at the very southern tip of it that touches Cambodia at Ha Tien, and then made my way up through Ho Chi Minh City, and then basically up the coast, except I did go up to the mountains in Dalat, and then back to the coast, and then to Hanoi, and then kind of west and south to hit Laos. And Vietnam is about the same length as the east coast of the United States, but very thin. And it changes quite a bit. The south is mostly the Mekong Delta, so it's very flat. And when you're going through the Mekong Delta, it's just a lot of very little bridges, a lot of big bridges, a lot of ferries, and a lot of rice fields. Going up to Dalat was actually, at that point, it was like the most difficult part of my trip going up the mountain. I think I had like 8 miles of climbing to do. And I was going up the mountain and it was just like, I was dying. It was like, oh, I'm going, I didn't have to get off and push. So it wasn't actually that steep, but it just took me so long and it ended up getting dark. I didn't know where I was going to stay because I carry a tent and a sleeping bag, but there is no place, there is no roads, there is nothing off to the side but jungle on both sides. So there is no place to even pitch a tent. And I knew I had to keep going. And I was riding about an hour and a half in the dark. I saw a light up ahead. I knew that I was coming to a plateau before I had to keep climbing. I couldn't quite tell what the light was. And when you're totally exhausted, like things just don't make sense. It turned out it was a coffee shop kind of at the top of the mountain where people stop. And they were closing up at the time. And I just used Google Translate on my phone. And I said, can I set up my tent in your parking lot? And they said, no. And I looked at it, they said, no. And they pointed, they said, they made me set up my tent inside of the coffee shop. And it was just a mother, a father, and about a 12-year-old daughter, the three of them. So they made me dinner and I got to sit with them and kind of talk a little bit with Google Translate. And then slept in the tent inside the coffee shop. And it rained. Oh, it rained horrendously that night. And I was so happy that they made me put my tent inside. In the morning, when I woke up, it was about 6:00, took the tent down. And the first customers came up, and they were local Vietnamese people. It was a modern coffee shop, and they had big, huge tables that would hold like 12 people. And they had about, 6, 8 of those. And I was sitting at one having some coffee. And this family comes in, like 10, 12 people out of a van, and they had to sit at my table. Even though every other table was empty, there was nobody else there. They had to sit with the American. And none of them spoke English. And I spoke, obviously, no Vietnamese. The people, for some reason, they're attracted to like Western and American people. And like, again, hard to become lonely in a place where people kind of flock to you in a way. So the Vietnamese people were wonderful throughout the whole country, north and south. And even though a lot of people worry about the traffic, I think living in Cambodia kind of conditioned me also, like on a motorcycle and bicycle. But I found Vietnam was actually very easy to cycle through, even with the traffic in Ho Chi Minh and worse traffic up in Hanoi. And the food, my favorite food is Vietnamese by far. I just love Vietnamese food.
Did you have a favorite city in Vietnam?
I like Hanoi quite a bit. And Hanoi is much older, where Ho Chi Minh is new and modern and big, tall buildings and just like any other modern city. But Hanoi still has like the old part. The roads are narrow, chaotic, and just street food all over the place. It's just got kind of a vibe that I really like. But I did find quite a few smaller cities along the way. One thing I love to say, I love to come down in the morning in my guest house and go, can I stay one more night? Can I stay one more night? Because if I really like a place, then I just want to stay. And you never know what a place is going to be like until you go to. Sometimes I would go into a city. I can't remember this one, but it was in Vietnam. It was kind of like very boring going into the city, and I found a place to stay. And it's like, well, yeah, this place, I'll be out of here tomorrow. And then I went to look for some dinner, and I just went down a different road. It just became a wonderful city. I was just on the wrong road. And I ended up staying there, I think, 2 nights total, but you just never know what you're going to find.
After Vietnam, I think you go into Laos. And I remember from your blog, you said it was much calmer. It was much more peaceful. What do you remember about Laos?
Yeah. It was, the Vietnamese people were very outgoing and friendly, and like they'd be hello, 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 like constantly. One thing I love to go to movies. And actually on this trip, like last night was my 99th movie on this trip in Sydney. So I've almost been to 100 movies so far in a year and a half. But you would go and people would just like smile at you, like in the escalator going up, almost like you're a celebrity in a way. It was just very weird. But then you go to Laos and the people are much more shy and much more reserved. A lot of times they won't say hello, but if you say hello, almost always they would just perk up and smile. They just didn't know what to expect. And I would always laugh Usually it was men, not like young men, but like 30s, 40s, 50s. And they'd be walking down the street and you know that they saw you. And as you're riding by, they just look straight ahead. It's like, nope, I'm not going to look at them. I'm not going to look at them. And you go by. And when that used to happen in Cambodia on my motorcycle, I would look in my rear view mirror and you could, every time, as soon as you passed, they'd turn around and look at you. But, they didn't want you to know that they noticed you. But also I was in Vang Vieng, and it's kind of a tourist, kind of backpacker kind of city. So it's a little bit busier than most of Laos. And I remember I was going to cross the street and I saw a motorcycle coming down the road. So I waited and I waited and I waited. And it's like I could have crossed the street like 2 times. But in Laos, they just go so much slower. But I'm used to like Cambodia and Vietnam where they're just whizzing down the road. So I stopped and waited. But no, they're just nice and calm. So very different in that respect.
Isn't there a place over there where they don't want foreigners? Foreigners aren't supposed to ride motorbikes. Is that Siem Reap? Is that in Cambodia? Have you run into that anywhere?
In Siem Reap, officially, foreigners are not allowed to rent motorbikes. Originally, they say that came from days a little bit past when the Khmer Rouge was still around. And there was some fighting going on here and there. And there's still like many unexploded landmines. And they just didn't want people to run into danger, is what they said. So they kind of said that you can't rent motorbikes, but you go and you can rent them like all over the place. I hear that they're starting to crack down a little bit more and police are stopping more people. And I don't know if that's still the case or what's going on. But for me, I bought my motorcycle. It was in my name and I never got pulled over by the police in Cambodia, or I also rode in Vietnam. So neither place.
All right. Back to Laos for a moment. 4,000 Islands. I'd never heard of that. What is that place like?
4,000 Islands is down right in the south near the border with Cambodia, and the Mekong River comes down, and it's just like very flat area because it's part of the Mekong Delta, and just all these islands like all over the place. There's one main island, Don Det, that a lot of backpackers and everything go, and you have to go over by a little boat. Basically, it's just like a very laid back, quiet, like tourist place. And for me, I'm trying to think of what month I was there. I think I was there in September. And that was just a very quiet time. And the main road, and when I say road, it was more kind of a wide path because they don't have cars basically they don't have roads that you can actually go on. So everything is kind of dirt, and it might be, maybe 15 feet wide. But like looking down, I could look down between all the kind of restaurants and guest houses that are very small, but there's nobody on the road, nobody walking around. It was that quiet. So I don't know how busy it gets during the busy season, but just a place to kind of go and chill out and relax and enjoy things for a while.
I always enjoy seeing photographs where the cyclist has put their bike on a boat and has to get ferried across a river or something. I think, wow, what a cool photo. But then I wonder, is that an enjoyable experience for you, the cyclist?
The one like going to Don Det, it's a very small, narrow boat, but it could probably hold like 15 people, but they're wooden boats and they don't have to go that far. But one time in Laos, I had to cross the Mekong, and the only boat that I could find was basically, it said ferry, and I go and there's like no ferry, on the map it says ferry, and I go and there's like just these little like 4-man boat kind of things. I just kind of look around and there's a little restaurant or store kind of thing on the edge, and I just, question, I go ferry, and somebody just shook their head, yes. And I turned around and then some kid comes. He was probably like 18, 17 years old. And we walked down to the water and, they got a little plank and we kind of walk my bike up on there and lay it down. And there's barely enough room for me, him, and the bike. and going all the way across. And the Mekong is a pretty wide river. You say you like the pictures, and I kind of like the experience of doing that. It's like, yeah, this is pretty cool. Just me, him, my bike, and I just hope we don't sink because there are no standards whatsoever, no legal standards or actual standards for any of the boats or anything like that. It's kind of like, hey, my son will take you over kind of a thing. And you just pay, I don't even know how much it was, but it wasn't much money at all. Of course, when we get to the other side, the people are quite surprised to see a white guy on a bicycle getting off of one of the boats. I was going to unpack everything, but he said, no, and we were able to get it on there without dropping it in the water.
What's after Laos?
Laos, I went back into Cambodia. I mean, I didn't need to bike around Cambodia because Cambodia, like you said, all 24 provinces before and traveled quite a bit. So it was just a matter of basically getting back through Cambodia. I stopped in Siem Reap for a few days just to relax and hang out with people I knew, and then continued on back to Bangkok.
Tell me a little bit about Myanmar.
I've been there before on a photo tour. That was like 2 weeks. And of course, everything is laid out for you and planned, and buses and restaurants. And so you get taken to the photo spots and at the right time and everything. But going by bicycle was completely different. And I was actually a little worried about it in the beginning. But there's a girl, her name is Jin. She's from South Korea. And she's been traveling around the world by bicycle since 2011. Right now, she's actually in Australia working to get some money to continue whatever she's going to do. And she went into Myanmar. I was in contact with her and I said, I heard, Myanmar is kind of difficult and, there's all these places you can't go and hotels you can't stay in and police checks and all that. And, she said she did fine and she really enjoyed it. So I thought, yeah, I'll go into Myanmar. And then there's very few places to go in and out of Myanmar. In fact, over land, you can only go 2 borders at that time. And one borders Thailand, or they both border Thailand, but one kind of in the middle west of Thailand and one in the far south along the tail. And I said, well, I'll just go there and hang out and ride for a bit and come out the same border that I went through. But while I was on the trip, they actually opened the border to India. They opened 2 land borders to foreigners between Myanmar and India. So at that point, I always wanted to go to Nepal, just generally, not only on bicycle. And it was like, well, I can go to Nepal because now they opened the border. So my trip, I kind of did a side trip of, about 5,000 miles and went through Myanmar. So that took me through some of the more non-touristy parts of Myanmar. And the people there are just absolutely wonderful. And I couldn't believe how helpful everybody was. And you could tell that the people wanted you to enjoy your time in their country. The police, the military one time, military truck passed me and they pulled in front of me and they waved me down to stop. And I thought, oh, another passport check. And no, they came out with a cold bottle of water to give to me. And people would go and they would pass me and then they would go up ahead to a store and buy me some cold beverages and bring them back. And people were just unbelievably nice. And as I headed towards India, it got even better and better. I had to stop. Unfortunately for India, you can only get a visa in your home country or a country that borders India. So while I was in Thailand and had a lot of time, I couldn't get the visa for India. So when I went through Mandalay, which I knew that I liked, so I knew that I wouldn't mind spending 7 days there. The problem was Myanmar only gives you 28-day visa with no extension. So 7 days waiting in Mandalay meant I had 21 days to kind of travel across the country. After Mandalay, it got more remote and where people don't go as tourists. And some of the climbs were absolutely horrendous. And the roads were broken. Some of the bridges, they had cracks in them that, my wheels could have fallen through and everything. And so you had to be kind of careful. But the people became more and more friendly the farther away I got from the touristy parts, which were still very friendly. My favorite food overall is ice cream. I love ice cream. I can't tell you how many ice cream guys on a bicycle I would like stop and get an ice cream. But 2 days in a row in Northwest Myanmar, I would stop the guy on the bicycle, and, it's like they wouldn't take any money for the ice cream. They just wanted, no, it's for you. And they could speak a little English, so they would say thank you, and that was it. You can only stay in government-approved guest houses and hotels in Myanmar, so most of them aren't available to stay in. And as I got to the more remote, number one, there were no guest houses, and then there were almost no guest houses that accepted foreigners. So I ended up staying quite a few nights in monasteries that I would show up and ask if I could stay, and they would give me a place to set up my tent and spend the night there. And a lot of people that said that they stayed in monasteries, that the monks would always call the police, and the police would come and check you out. And people talked about, like, they questioned them for an hour. They looked at their passports. And I can't remember, like 4 or 5 days that I stayed with the monks. Not one time did they ever have the police come and check me out. The main monk would just say, okay, and they would kind of point. They didn't speak English. And you could tell that they really enjoyed having like a foreigner spend the night in their monastery.
Well, that's a little bit different, I think, than what you experienced in Bangladesh. But let's put a pin in that right now. And so after Myanmar, then that's when you get into India. How long were you in India?
49 days total. But I had a triple entry visa into India because I had to go Myanmar to India, then Bangladesh to India, then Nepal to India. My total days in India were 49, but split up by 2 other countries.
What was your experience like in India?
India was very interesting. When I first made it to India, it was one of the few times on the trip that it was about an hour before I got to the border. And all of a sudden it's like, what the hell are you doing? You're on a bicycle and you're riding into the middle of nowhere into India, and I started like almost doubting myself in a way. And it's like, well, there's nothing I can do. I'm in the middle of nowhere. My visa, actually, I overstayed my visa a day. And so I had to go to India, and it's not like I could just hop on a plane and go home. As I rounded the corner, I saw this big, huge flag of India flying. And immediately as I looked at it, all of a sudden, like lightning and thunder. And it hadn't rained like in almost 2 months, I think. And the rain just came down and poured. And I made it to the border, which happened to be the wrong border. It was the border for locals. And people pointed me to go down. It's just like 1.5 kilometers down the road. And so people just kept pointing me. And somehow I ended up in India. And I go to the border and try to cross. And they go, oh, welcome to Myanmar. I go, no, I'm going to India. They said, no, you're in India. I said, no, I'm in Myanmar. And they said, no, come to find out, somehow I got in India by accident. And after I went across the bridge and then officially came back into India, then I realized the mistake. So somehow it was kind of like easy to do something like that. I can't imagine if I did that in the U.S., I'd probably still be in jail at this point. But over there, they didn't care. And then the border town was like a rough, dirty border town. And India is very interesting because hotel is not someplace you sleep. That's someplace you eat. And so when you look at Google Maps and they say hotel, 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 those are all restaurants. They're not actual hotels. So that was a little bit of a change going over there.
So what is a place that you sleep called?
Sometimes it's hotel, but usually you have to kind of look because they're kind of changing a little bit. But they'll have signs that say lodging or rooms. So some restaurants are attached to a hotel, but you can't tell that like looking at Google Maps. I would have to actually look in the reviews for a hotel and see if somebody talked or had pictures of actual beds or if they talked about staying there overnight or something like that. So that part of India was nothing like the India that I saw previously on TV. I think basically we see pictures of Mumbai and New Delhi with, millions and millions of people and crowds and all this. And here I am in the mountains. It's like, well, where the heck are all the people? And for the first, weeks, it was like just farmland and mountains. And, I would get to maybe a city that was busy and chaotic and everything, but a smaller city. So it actually surprised me quite a bit. It was nothing like the India that I expected in the beginning. The part of India I didn't like so much was after I made it out of Nepal, and I was going to end my trip like at the Taj Mahal and then fly back to Bangkok to continue. The temperature was, it would get up to like 112 during the day, and the riding was flat. And that state, for some reason, they didn't allow foreigners in hotels that often. And I was having trouble finding lodging and everything. And it was like, the heat was getting to me, and the beeping, the constant beeping of people say Vietnam is bad, but for me, India was bad. I'd go to a hotel at night or a guest house, and it's like, no, move on, no, move on, no, move on. And it's like, I got to get out of this place. And then the next morning I would get up and ride, and I'd stop someplace for breakfast, and the people were so wonderful. And I said, no, this place isn't so bad. I don't mind it. And then I'd go through the heat, and it would just grate on me day. It was like, I just can't do this anymore.
Sorry, Scott, what do you mean no move on? You mean you were getting denied to trying to...
Yeah, to stay because they didn't allow foreigners at a lot of hotels. And even if I booked and paid online, was not a guarantee that they were going to let me stay when I got there. And I think to allow foreigners, they had to do certain paperwork with the government. And some people just didn't want to do that. So, they just would say, you'd go to a hotel that was completely empty. And it was like, no, you can't stay here. And it was like, I'm just not used to that kind of, in the United States, you just stay wherever you stay. In Vietnam, everybody gets to stay wherever, it wasn't, I knew Myanmar was like that, but Myanmar was, opening up to tourism in the past decade or so, couple of decades, where India, I just didn't expect that. And I didn't get it until I dropped down from Nepal again. Before that, I had problems finding guest houses, but I was never denied. At one point, I was going into Lucknow, which was a big city, and it turned out to be kind of a very clean, very different city. It was kind of weird in a way, but I noticed they had a Hilton, and a couple of days in advance, I booked the Hilton for 2 nights, and I think it was $65 a night, which by American standards is not much, but by standards on my trip was quite expensive. Because my lodging, I try to average $15 a day for that. So $65 a night was quite a bit. And I went there and they treated me like royalty. The manager wanted a video interview with me. They were having a wedding there that day, and people took me and explained everything about the wedding process. And when I ended up leaving, and I was leaving, my average start time is like 9:15 in the morning. And I was leaving like 6 o'clock in the morning because of the heat in India. When I left in the morning, the chef and all the crew from the kitchen were down at the front desk. And I go and I check out, and they made a cake for me with a bicycle on it for my going away. And I just kind of laughed. It's like, what am I going to do with the cake on a bicycle? And I just graciously, thank you. And I kind of bungee corded it on the back of my bike and everything. And my intention, it was in a box, so it wasn't squished or anything. And my intention was to find somebody along the way and just kind of give them the cake. But because it was so hot, the cake basically melted by the time I found it. So I opened up the box, and there's just this melted mess inside. And so even they didn't want it. But it was just wonderful the way that they, treated me. Then when my trip, I always wanted to ride to the Taj Mahal. So I made it to the Taj Mahal. And then I was going to go 2 more days to New Delhi and then get my flight to Bangkok. But because of the experiences it's like, I just can't go through that not finding a hotel. I had my tent. But when it's 110 degrees during the day, I'm not sleeping in a tent at night. It's just too hot. And I would have been miserable. So I ended the ride in Agra, and then I took a taxi with my bike to New Delhi to fly back. I just couldn't go through the heat and the honking and the no, you can't stay here, even though that might not have happened, but it's just like, okay, I'm done.
Did you at least enjoy the food in India?
I enjoy the food everywhere I go. One frustrating thing about food is you'll go in these small towns and everything and eat in these family restaurants, and by no means are these like restaurants like Americans would think of restaurants. They're more like the front of somebody's home where you're sitting at a table and literally 5 feet away from you is their bed that they sleep on at night. This is the way things are set up. But you'll go there and you'll have something that's absolutely wonderful. And it's like, I don't know what it was, and I don't know how to ask for it someplace else. So many times I would have, and it would just, I'll point at something and it ends up being like wonderful. And I think some of the best food is in the places that you would least expect it. Like we always think you go to a nice restaurant, you pay a lot of money and you get good food. But when you have a meal that's like unbelievable and it's like, wow, this was only 80 cents or $1.20 or something like that. And it's just wonderful. But, I don't think I really had anything that I didn't like on the whole trip so far. Some things were interesting, I guess, tasting, but there was really nothing that I couldn't eat or didn't eat. Yeah, enjoying and trying out new foods, I like doing. So I was very happy with that aspect.
I alluded to some police issues in Bangladesh. Tell me what happens when you get into Bangladesh.
Well, that was something I didn't know, and I don't know why I wanted to ride to Bangladesh, but it was like basically on the way. So it's like, okay, another country, I'll go to Bangladesh. And I really didn't research like visas or stuff like that too much. I knew I could do like a visa on arrival, but apparently that's not completely normal at every border. So when I got to the border, it was interesting because they didn't know if they were going to let me in or not and do a visa on arrival. So I was on the India side. But one of the things in India is people want selfies with you all the time. And people will stop you on the side of the road. They'll drive by and they'll stop. And I had times where somebody stopped me and then I looked and there was like 5 more cars behind me, all people waiting to get selfies with me. You'll stop for a drink and all of a sudden you're surrounded by people. They just look at you like kind of almost a blank stare, which can be unnerving at times. For the most part, it didn't bother me. So when I got to the border, I had all the people there, they'd hover around my bike and, people that would speak English would ask me questions. Everybody was very helpful at the border. They were taking my passport, going to Bangladesh, talking to the people. They were coming over to talk to me. And one thing you don't get a lot of in India is alcohol. I don't drink a lot, but I like to have a beer every once in a while with dinner and stuff like that when it's hot. And so I was telling the customs guy that, it's been like a month and a half since I had a beer. And he just kind of laughed and he had one of his workers go and get me a cold beer. So I'm sitting in the customs, like drinking a cold beer, waiting for Bangladesh to see whether or not they're going to let me in. They did decide they were going to let me in, but they gave me only a 2-week visa. So I said, well, 2 weeks? Yeah, that's fine. I crossed the border. It was getting close to dark. And the next town was only about 10 miles in. So I made it there. And of course, the place where it said there was lodging on Google Maps, there was nothing. It was just an empty field. And I found a hotel and I went in and somehow, I guess they ended up contacting the police to let the police know that I was there. So the police came to talk to me and all these people are like in the lobby. Nobody has uniforms or guns. And it's like, are these police or what's going on? Then everything was okay. And then I went to dinner and they had a guy that spoke English, kind of go to dinner with me. While we were there, he got a phone call and he said, a different police wants to talk to you. They're going to come down to the restaurant. So they come and talk to me at the restaurant while I'm eating and, no problem. Then I go back to the hotel. They said, oh, the supervisor of the police district wants to talk to you. He'll be here in 5 minutes. So then all these other people come, and he spoke English and he was talking to me, and he said, okay, well, we're going to have some people follow you to keep you safe. And we're going to put 3 policemen in the room next to you tonight. So now I'm starting to get a little bit worried. It's like, why am I here in Bangladesh? And why are these police like going to be in the room next to me? And I didn't quite understand what was going on while I was sitting in my room, and the room was more like a jail cell, and the electricity was going on and off and noises and everything. And I'm just wondering, it's like, okay, tomorrow I'm just going 10 miles back. I'm going to India. And when I got up in the morning and went to breakfast, the same guy that spoke English, which happened to be just somebody that helped me find the hotel, they had him go eat. And I was asking him questions like, they just want to make sure that you feel comfortable, that you feel safe. After talking to him, it put my mind at ease. So I said, okay, I'm going to stay. And I continued. But come to find out, the police followed me, like literally with me, the entire 2 weeks that I was there. Every 10 miles, they would have 2 new people on a motorcycle. They would follow me, or they would have a truck, or they would have tuk-tuk, and the police, and they had shotguns, and they were with me all the time. When I went to a restaurant, when I went to a hotel at night, when I wanted to go to dinner, they would call the police, and the police would come back and they would escort me to the restaurant. And one time I went to a Chinese restaurant. It was up on the 2nd floor, and I had 5 police with 3 shotguns walking me up the stairs. And I felt like I was like a mafia informant in New York City or something. It's like, but you get to the point that this becomes comical. And they were all extremely nice. I think I made them more comfortable too, because I would always stop and I would interact with people, take pictures of people. And a couple of things that I try to do in every country I go to the cinema. And I didn't go to the cinema in Bangladesh because I couldn't find one that looked like a legitimate cinema. And then I wasn't sure if I was going to have to buy the guy with a shotgun sitting next to me, if I was going to have to pay for his popcorn or not. So I just kind of bypassed that one. But I also try to get a haircut in every country. So I have a picture of me in the barber shop in Bangladesh with the cop sitting next to me with a shotgun in his lap. That's probably the first and the last time I'll ever have that happen to me. But a few times I would stop to get drink or food or something, and the policeman would pay for it. He goes, no, you are our guest. And he would pay for my food. One time they took me to the police station. They made me food, made me lunch at the police station. So they were wonderful. And it did come in handy. Like I needed to get a SIM card. So I get on the back of the guy's motorbike, and we go through this busy town and go to the cell phone place. And the place has 15, 20 people waiting for their number to be called. And we just go up, and the lady at the little machine, she punches in some numbers, and out comes my number 1. It's no waiting. So when you walk in with police with shotguns, you don't have to wait in line.
Nice perk. Yeah, nice perk.
Yeah. So it changed the aspect, but I don't think everybody that goes through has to go through that. But I did end up stopping for a drink across the street. I didn't know it was at a hospital school, which was run by an American organization. They ended up giving me a tour of the hospital and the school. And I came back 2 days later and stayed for 3 days. And I gave a couple of talks to the kids in school about the bike ride and everything. But there's a lot of foreigners there, and they say they can walk around town alone. But if they were to go to another city and take a train, that they would have a police escort also. And they told me that a village just 2 miles down the road, they actually recently had 2 ISIS people arrested, and the townspeople wanted nothing to do with them, so they turned them in. Back in, I think, 2017, they had a bombing in Dhaka, which killed a number of foreign tourists. They don't like their country being associated with terrorism. So I think that's where the police come in. And when I was there, it was actually 1 or 2 weeks after the bombings in Sri Lanka. And I think they were a little bit more heightened at that point. When I stayed at the guest house at the hospital school, I was able to sneak out and walk around the village on my own. And I didn't feel like uncomfortable in the least. And one day the police were late coming to the hotel. Usually they were waiting for me, like, okay, tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Okay. And they were always there like early. And they weren't there this one day. And it was like 45 minutes. And I said, no, I have to leave. I have to go. And the hotel, it's like, no, they'll be. I said, no, I'm leaving. And I felt bad for the hotel because they also feel responsible for you. So I was able to make it like 20 minutes before they caught up with me. Again, I didn't feel uncomfortable in the least, but I think I kind of stand out as a white guy on a bike in Bangladesh. But Bangladesh itself really surprised me because being a very poor place, and I wasn't anywhere near Dhaka, but the roads were fantastic. They didn't have like trash. It was all clean and farmland. When you would get near some villages, you would have some trash piles, and it was a little bit different, but it was just very unbelievably green. And the people, like I said, the people in India would surround you if you stopped or people wanted selfies. Bangladesh was like India on steroids. It was like even worse. The number of people that would surround you, but just being curious. They just wanted to meet you and talk to you. And so I was very happy. I wanted to stay in Bangladesh longer, but I would have to ride to Dhaka to get a visa extension. And I wasn't sure if I could get it, so that would have wasted all that time. So I just took the 2 weeks and then made my way back to India.
What's your favorite part of cycle touring?
I think the fact that everything in front of me is brand new. I don't know what to expect. I can't tell you how many times I'll look at a new place or area on Google Maps or whatever. And in my head, I think I have it figured out. And then I get there and it's just completely different. Riding someplace that you've never been, everything is brand new. And you never know what kind of people you're going to meet, what kind of food you're going to have, I know a bit about the terrain. I know if I'm going to have to climb thousands of feet kind of a thing, but I don't know the subtleties of the lay of the land and kind of the smaller things. So it's just, to me, it's very adventurous, like not knowing what's going to come next and not knowing where I'm going to sleep tonight, much less tomorrow, the next day or whatever. Just having everything, everything in front of me is new and everything behind me, I've already been.
Let's transition the talk to photography. I know that's something that's big in your life. How did you first start really getting into photography?
Boy, I just remember liking photography even being a young kid. I always liked taking pictures, but I didn't really get into it until the early 2000s when digital came out. And basically all your mistakes were free. You didn't have to pay for those. No film and no processing. And so you could practice. I don't know what it is about it that I like, but it's something that's just very enjoyable to me. And I think for me, photography has taken me so many places that I might not have gone previously because I want to get a picture. So I get to experience so many things because of that desire. There is a place in Utah that they had in India Kiva, but you had to basically hike 14 miles round trip. And I did it in the wintertime, and I was the only person there. And I went and I had a wonderful time, and I got to see something that kind of blows my mind. And I thought, if it wasn't for the fact that I wanted to get a picture, I wonder if I would have actually gone to that place. So I think it helps draw me to new places and new experiences.
Yeah, it gives you a reason to go somewhere and something to do when you get there.
Yeah.
What kind of camera do you use? Do you keep it in your handlebar bag ready to go?
I do. Originally, for many years, I had like top-of-the-line Nikons with big lenses and everything. But going on this trip, I knew they were basically just too big and heavy. Even just bringing one lens, it would fit in my handlebar bag, but nothing else would fit in there. So when I went to America, I sold all my camera gear and I got a Sony mirrorless camera. it seemed okay, but actually like the roads in India kind of trashed that camera. So the bouncing and everything on the road construction and everything just ended up, the camera didn't work all the time. So I wasn't able to take too many pictures, like as many as I would have. And when I got back to Bangkok, I went to have it fixed. I wanted like over $1,000 to fix it. And I said no. In between that time, Nikon came out with their full frame mirrorless cameras. And so I switched back to Nikon and I got a Z6. And so that is always in my handlebar bag, ready to go. I can just stop, bike still between my legs, open it up, pull out the camera, get a shot, put it back and go. But I will, because it's more convenient, more often get pictures with my phone.
What's the lens of choice on your Nikon?
The Nikon, because it was brand new and they actually had a new size opening in the front of their camera. And so they had very limited lenses. And I just got 24-70, which is f4.0. I really, really miss my 2.8 lenses, which tend to be bigger, but they give more of a background blur and everything. I wish that I had wider, and I wish that I had more of a telephoto, but I can only carry so much stuff on my bike. So I make do with just one camera, one lens.
I think it was back in Cambodia. You took this picture of a father in his home with his wife and two children in the background, and the father's just smiling, like everything is for him is the best thing in the world. Tell me about that photograph.
That was during my first photo tour, and that was at Kampong Kleong Floating Village, probably like an hour and a half away from Siem Reap. And we went there and walked down. It was just a dirt road. People then, very few tourists would go to this town because they have other floating villages closer by that people would always go to. That trip really changed a lot of things for me, but I got that one picture of the guy. He was just like leaning in the doorway, open doorway of his house on stilts. And when you looked inside the floor, you could see like through the floor down to the water. His wife was feeding a little baby and the kid was there. And he just had the proudest, most content smile on his face. And to me, here was a man that by Western standards had nothing, but basically he had everything. He had a home, a roof, food, a family, and that was what made him happy. So after I saw that, I was living in Hawaii at the time, and it's like I went back to Hawaii and I sold everything I didn't need. It was like, I don't need all this stuff. And that was what gave me enough money to go back later that year for 3 months, was getting rid of all that extra stuff I didn't need anymore. Actually, I went back to Kampong Kleong many times because I liked it. And I would always print some pictures of the people I took previously and kind of hand them out. And there's one girl that I kept seeing, and I have a picture of her holding the picture of her, holding the picture of her. So it was like 3 times that I kind of ran into her. But this man, I could just never find. I'm not sure. And the town isn't that big. It's just like one dirt road in the middle of the water that has homes on both sides. Yeah, I never got to see him again.
I think as a way to earn a little extra money online, you're trying to sell some of your photographs. How is that process? How is that going? Are you able to make a little bit of money?
I make a little bit, but me, it's like, yeah, I'm riding my bike around the world, but I still consider myself a lazy person. There are certain things I don't like to put the time into, so I don't push that too much. And I need to upload more pictures from the trip. I have some, but not too many. But yeah, I have pictures available on the trip to bring in something. I also made a book through Blurb, People of Southeast Asia. So a lot of times when I was living in Cambodia and traveling, I would put picture smile of the day, like on Facebook. And because I think the smiles, especially in Cambodia, were just fantastic. And so I put together a book. I forgot, I think it has like 115 pictures or so in there. So that brings in a little bit of money too. So if I would push these things a little bit more, then, I'm sure I could make a little bit more money in those.
Blurb. I've never heard of that before. What was that, like a place where you just sell picture books?
Blurb is like self-publishing. So they just print the book as people order them, which makes them a little bit more expensive than a regular book. If I put this book together, like living in the US, I could buy 100 of them and basically sell them for half the price of what they go when they have to print them individually. But for me, on Blurb, I have hardcover, softcover, but you can also get ebook or PDF also. So those are cheap, where you don't get a physical book, but just the PDF file or ebook file.
Well, send me the link and I'll put it in the show notes for the podcast. Do you have any photo tips for travelers?
There's two aspects of photography, the visual and the technical. And the technical, pretty much everybody can learn, but learn as much as you can about light, because light is the most important aspect of photography. You know, you may want to get a picture of a person that if you just turn them around in the opposite direction, the light would be much better. So if you learn about light, I think is the most technical part of photography that you need to know and understand. And then depending on the kind of pictures you like to take, if you like to take pictures of people, don't be afraid of taking pictures of people. For many years, my pictures of people were usually stalking pictures where I would get pictures of them from behind or something, a silhouette. Then for some reason in Cambodia, I just take pictures of people. On my trip, as I'm going down the street, looking for someplace to eat or get a drink, I'm actually looking at which way the light is. So which side of the street do I want to stop on and who has the most interesting people? So that's usually how I pick my restaurants is more, if I go here, maybe I can get some pictures of the people inside. So most people, if they don't want their picture taken, they're not being rude, but most people don't feel that they're worthy of a picture. Like, why would you want a picture of me? Or, oh, today I look awful, or I'm missing my teeth, or, something like that. So it's not like, they don't like you. They don't want you to take their picture. But when they say no, it's like, okay, and you just kind of move on and go to the next person. But don't take rejection too much to heart. And I think for the most part, people love getting their picture taken. And if I stop at a market and I'm there taking pictures of people, you just kind of turn around and you can see how many people want their picture taken. And I can't take pictures of everybody. So I actually feel bad when I pass people and don't ask them if I can take their picture. I think people pictures just add so much to anywhere you go, memories that you have through your pictures.
Scott, what's next for you?
I just landed in Sydney, Australia yesterday, and I will cycle from Sydney, Australia on the East Coast down along the South Coast to Perth on the West Coast, which is about 3,500 miles, I think, of riding.
How can people contact you if they want to learn more?
My website is adventuresofregularguy.com, and Instagram and YouTube are both my name, Scott Sharick.
And Sharick is spelled Sharick.
Yes.
Scott Sharick, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Great stories. And good luck with your trip through Australia and wherever else you end up after that.
Thank you. Great talking to you.
Thank you for listening. You can find this episode online at thepursuitzone.com/TPZ185. That's TPZ185. The best way, as always, to support the podcast is to subscribe and share the episode with your friends. You can find subscription links at thepursuitzone.com. If you're listening on YouTube, be sure to give this a thumbs up. And you can like and follow on Facebook. You'll find it at The Pursuit Zone. If you want to send me feedback, you can write to me at paul@thepursuitzone.com, or you can leave me a voice message at speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. This episode was recorded on the 18th of October, 2019. For the show notes and more great adventure travel podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.